My parents built an empire worth over $1 billion. They had everything: power, respect, influence. But there was one thing they didn't think they needed: me. They told me I was useless. They said my dreams were worthless. They cut me off like I was nothing. But here's what they didn't realize: I was the only thing holding everything together. And when I left, everything fell apart. This is the story of how my rich family lost it all. If you've ever been underestimated, hit like and subscribe. This story will change how you see family. My name is James Whitmore. I'm 28 years old, and I just realized something that changed my life. My family never needed me. Or at least, that's what they told me. My father, Charles Montgomery, built a real estate empire from nothing. By the time I was born, he owned over 300 properties across 3 states. My mother, Eleanor Harrington, came from old money, generational wealth, the kind that built museums and funded politicians. Together, they created a dynasty worth approximately $1.2 billion. But here's the thing about empires: sometimes the most important people are the ones nobody sees. Growing up in the Montgomery Harrington household meant one thing: everything I did was monitored, controlled, and judged. My parents had this strange relationship with me. On one hand, I was supposed to be perfect, the heir to their empire, groomed from birth to take over and expand the family business. On the other hand, I was constantly told that I was disappointing, that I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't have the killer instinct necessary to run a multi-billion-dollar operation. It was a contradiction that would define my entire childhood. My father had a saying: "A Whitmore must be ruthless. A Whitmore must be willing to make the hard decisions. A Whitmore must never let emotion get in the way of profit." I was 8 years old the first time I heard him say this. He was on a business call, firing someone, a loyal employee of 20 years, because the company's quarterly earnings were down 3%. I remember asking my mother why he did that. Why he didn't give the man a chance to improve. She looked at me like I had asked the most naive question in the world. "Because sentiment is weakness, James," she said. "And weakness destroys empires." That was the philosophy of my family. That was what I was being raised to become. But I was different. My parents didn't know this at the time, but I had been secretly volunteering at a community center in the city. I was tutoring kids from low-income families. I was helping them with homework, with college applications, with life advice. I was doing this while my parents thought I was at tennis lessons or piano recitals. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that actually mattered. When my parents finally found out, and of course they did, because privacy was a luxury we didn't have in that house, they were furious. Not because I was helping people, but because I was wasting time. Because I was distracted from my real purpose. "You're supposed to be learning how to run a business," my father said coldly. "Not playing social worker." That's when I knew. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an asset, as a tool, as something that was supposed to serve their legacy. And if I couldn't do that, I was useless to them. So I made a decision. I was going to stop trying to be what they wanted me to be. I was going to be what I wanted to be. I was going to pursue acting. I was going to tell stories. I was going to create art instead of creating profit. My parents' response was immediate and brutal. "If you do this," my father said, "you will have nothing. No money, no trust fund, no inheritance, no access to the family name. You will be alone." He said it like it was a threat. Like being cut off from the family would destroy me. What he didn't realize was that I had already been alone. I had been alone my entire life, living in a house with 2 people who saw me as a project, not a person. "I'm going to Juilliard," I said quietly. "Then you're no longer a Whitmore," he replied. And just like that, I was gone. For 4 years, I didn't hear from my family. For 4 years, I built a life completely independent from them. I worked 3 jobs, went to school, pursued my passion, and became the person I was always meant to be. But what I didn't know was that while I was building my own life, my family's empire was crumbling. And the scariest part? My family didn't realize they had lost the most important person in their organization until it was too late. While I was at Juilliard, completely disconnected from my family, something strange was happening at Montgomery Properties. Things were falling apart. I didn't know this at the time. I was too busy working, studying, and building my own life. But my aunt, my mother's sister, Margaret, later told me that the moment I left, things started to unravel. My father had built an empire, yes. But he had built it on a very specific foundation: control. He controlled every decision. He controlled every employee. He controlled every aspect of the business. There was no delegation. There was no trust. There was just Charles Montgomery, making every call, micromanaging every project, ensuring that everything reflected his vision and his vision alone. It worked when Charles was younger. It worked when he had the energy to control everything. But by the time I was 18, my father was in his late 50s, and the stress of running a billion-dollar operation completely alone was destroying him. That's where I came in. Without realizing it, I had become the one person who could talk to my father about work. I was the only person he actually listened to. When I was younger, I would sit in his office and he would vent to me about deals going wrong, about employees not understanding his vision, about competitors threatening his position. I would ask questions. I would offer perspectives. I would help him think through problems. My father never recognized this as help. To him, I was just a sounding board. Just a kid asking naive questions. But my questions forced him to think differently. My perspectives, the ones he dismissed as emotional and weak, actually prevented him from making costly mistakes on numerous occasions. The truth was, I was the one thing that prevented my father's brutal, isolated management style from completely destroying the company. When I left, that voice disappeared. My father started making decisions without that check. He started implementing harsher policies, demanding more from employees, cutting corners to increase profits. Within 2 years, the best talent had left the company. Within 3 years, major clients were moving to competitors. Within 4 years, the company had lost 40% of its market value. My aunt told me that my father would work 16-hour days, trying to fix problems that were of his own making. He would come home and barely speak to my mother. He looked like a ghost of himself. He was destroying himself trying to save something that didn't need to be saved. It needed to be transformed. But my father didn't know how to transform. He only knew how to control. Meanwhile, my mother was dealing with her own crisis. The social circles that had defined her entire life began to distance themselves from the family. Not because they knew about the business problems. Those were kept quiet through lawyers and NDAs. But because they could sense that something was wrong. They could sense the desperation, the dysfunction, the cracks in the veneer. My mother had built her entire identity on being Mrs. Charles Montgomery, on being part of the most powerful couple in the city. When that power started to slip away, she started to slip away too. She began drinking more. She stopped attending charity galas. She became isolated. She became someone my father didn't even recognize. The irony was devastating. My parents had spent my entire childhood telling me that I was useless to them, that I was a disappointment, that I would never be good enough to help run the business. But the moment I left, they realized the truth. I was the only thing that had been holding them together. I was the only thing that had been preventing my father from becoming a complete tyrant. I was the only thing that had been keeping my mother connected to some version of humanity. I was the one voice in that cold, perfect house that had been saying, maybe there's another way. Maybe people matter. Maybe we should care about each other. They had rejected that voice. They had punished me for having that voice. And now, without me, they were watching their empire crumble. My aunt told me all of this years later, when it was too late to do anything about it. She told me that my mother had asked about me, that my father had almost called me on several occasions, but his pride wouldn't allow it. They had made their choice. They had chosen the empire over the person who was actually holding it together. And now they were reaping what they had sown. By the time I was 22 years old and graduating from Juilliard, the Montgomery Properties empire was in full collapse. I didn't know this. My life had moved completely beyond theirs. I was performing in off-Broadway productions. I was writing scripts. I was building relationships with other artists, other creators, other people who saw me as a person instead of an asset. But my aunt kept me informed. Not because my family asked her to, but because she loved me and she was watching my parents destroy themselves. "Your father had a massive heart attack last month," she told me during one of our secret phone calls. "He survived, but it shook him. He finally admitted to your mother that he thinks the company is in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Serious trouble," she said. "They're going to have to restructure. They're going to lose properties. Jobs are going to be cut. The whole thing is falling apart." I felt something shift inside me. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. Part of me wanted to feel angry, like they deserved this for how they had treated me. But mostly, I just felt sad. Sad for the people who would lose their jobs because my father couldn't learn to share power. Sad for my parents, who had built their entire lives on something that was crumbling. Sad for the waste of it all. But I didn't go running back to save them. I couldn't. And I wouldn't. 6 months later, the crash became public. Montgomery Properties filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was in all the newspapers. The headline was brutal: "Billion-dollar dynasty collapses. Montgomery Properties files for bankruptcy protection." The article went on to describe how a company that had seemed invincible just 5 years earlier had somehow managed to destroy itself from the inside out. Analysts were baffled. How does a real estate empire with strong fundamentals just fall apart? The answer was simple: because it was never really an empire. It was a one-man show. And when that one man couldn't adapt, couldn't delegate, couldn't accept help, the whole thing collapsed. My father gave a press conference where he tried to spin the narrative. He talked about market conditions, about unforeseen challenges, about the difficulty of operating in a competitive landscape. But the truth was visible in his face. He looked defeated. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had finally realized that he had built everything wrong. My mother didn't attend the press conference. She had suffered a breakdown and was hospitalized for depression and anxiety. I watched it all unfold from my tiny apartment in New York, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even schadenfreude. Just emptiness. Because the real tragedy wasn't that my parents had lost their money. It wasn't that their empire had crumbled. The real tragedy was that they had lost me, the one person who could have helped them. The one person who could have offered a different perspective. The one person who could have saved them from themselves. But they didn't want my help. They didn't want my perspective. They wanted me to be something I wasn't. And when I refused, they threw me away. Now they were paying the price. 2 years after the bankruptcy filing, my grandfather died and left me $800 million. I had become wealthy while my parents became poor. Not through inheritance, not through the family name, but through my own work, my own choices, my own life. When I found out about the inheritance, my first thought was, this is the ultimate irony. I'm exactly what my family thought I could never be. I'm successful. I'm wealthy. I'm powerful. And I got here completely without them. But my second thought was sadder, and they'll never forgive themselves for not believing in me. 3 years after the bankruptcy, my mother contacted me for the first time in nearly a decade. Not my father. Not through a lawyer. Just my mother, calling my office directly, asking if I would see her. I almost said no. But something made me agree. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the smallest, most stubborn part of me that still hoped my parents could become human. We met at a coffee shop, not a restaurant, not a hotel. Somewhere ordinary. Somewhere my mother could never have imagined going 10 years earlier. She looked like a different person. The elegant, perfectly put-together woman I remembered had been replaced by someone fragile, someone worn down by years of stress and regret. She was 61 years old, but looked 70. Her hands were shaking as she held her coffee cup. "James," she said, and her voice cracked on my name. "I don't know where to start." "Then don't start," I said coldly. "Just tell me why you're here." She flinched at my tone. "Good. Your father is dying," she said quietly. "Cancer. The doctors give him 3 months." I felt something twist in my chest. Not sadness. More like finality. Like a door was closing forever. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I was sorry. Sorry for him. Sorry for what his life had become. Sorry for all the time that had been wasted. "He wants to see you," my mother continued, "before it's too late. He wants to tell you." "I don't care what he wants to tell me," I interrupted. "Your family made their choice a long time ago. I made mine. That's the end of the story." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "James, please. You don't understand. When you left, everything fell apart. And we realized, too late, that we had lost the most important thing. We had lost you." I looked at this woman who had laughed at my dreams, who had told me that sentiment was weakness, who had chosen her empire over her son, and I felt a strange compassion. "You're right," I said quietly. "You did lose me. But not when I left Juilliard. You lost me years before that. You lost me the moment you decided that I was only valuable if I was useful to you. You lost me when you told me that my dreams were worthless. You lost me when you chose the money over me." My mother was sobbing now. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We were so wrong." "Yes," I said. "You were." There was a long silence. "I watched your films," my mother said suddenly. "I watched every single one. I was so proud of you. So incredibly proud. And I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell your father that his son, the son he said was useless, had become an artist that people actually cared about. I didn't say anything. I just listened. When your father had his first heart attack," she continued, "he asked about you. He wanted to call. But he was too proud. He thought you would hang up on him. He thought you hated him." "I don't hate him," I said. And it was true. I didn't hate my father. Hate requires energy. I had just moved on. I had become someone completely separate from that world. "He's afraid," my mother said. "He's dying, and he's afraid that he never got to tell you that he was proud of you. That he was sorry. That he was wrong." I absorbed this information without any emotional reaction. "Then he should have thought about that before he kicked me out," I said. "He should have thought about that every single day for the past 10 years when he could have picked up a phone and called me. Instead, he let his pride and his fear keep him isolated. And now he's running out of time." I stood up. "I'm sorry your family lost its empire," I continued. "I'm sorry my father is dying. I'm sorry you spent all these years realizing too late what actually mattered. But I can't fix that. I can't give you back the time you wasted. I can't make your husband feel better about the choices he made." My mother looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "Can't you just say goodbye?" she asked. "Can't you give him that?" I thought about it. I thought about my father, lying in a hospital bed somewhere, waiting for a call from a son he had rejected. I thought about how this moment, this deathbed revelation, was the only way he would ever admit he was wrong. And I realized something. His death wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the damage. It wouldn't heal the wound. It wouldn't bring back the 10 years he had missed. "No," I said simply. "I can't." And I walked away. My father died without seeing me. I found out through a news article. Charles Montgomery, billionaire real estate mogul, dies at 67. There was a photo of him from better days, power suit, confident smile, the image of a man who controlled everything. I didn't go to the funeral. My mother sent a letter. It said, "He asked for you at the end. Your name was the last word he spoke. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that even though he was too proud to say it while he was alive, he loved you. He was always proud of you." I read that letter once, and then I threw it away. Because I had already moved on. I had already built a life that didn't need my father's approval or my mother's regrets. I had already become successful without them. I had already found peace without their validation. The truth is, when you finally accept that your family will never be what you need them to be, something shifts inside you. You stop waiting for them to change. You stop hoping they'll finally understand. You stop believing that one day they'll apologize and everything will be fixed. You just move on. After my father's death, my mother tried to contact me again. She wanted to reconcile. She wanted to be part of my life. She wanted to repair the damage that had been done. But I didn't want that. I had spent enough years waiting for my parents to become people I could love. I had spent enough energy on a relationship that was fundamentally broken. So I was kind but firm. I told her that I had forgiven her, which was true in a way. I had forgiven her not for her sake, but for mine. I had forgiven her so I could let go. But I told her that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It meant moving forward separately. She understood, I think. Or at least, she accepted it. The irony of my life is this. My parents thought they didn't need me. They thought I was useless. They rejected me because I didn't fit into their vision of what a Whitmore should be. And then they spent the rest of their lives watching me become everything they thought I could never be. I became an artist. I became successful. I became respected. I became wealthy, not through inheritance, but through my own work. I became free. My parents, meanwhile, spent their final years watching their empire crumble. They spent it regretting. They spent it too late. That's the real tragedy. Not that they lost their money. Not that they lost their power. But that they lost the chance to be proud of me while I was still there to hear it. They thought they didn't need me. But I was the only thing that could have saved them, not from bankruptcy, but from themselves. 10 years after my parents' death, I'm sitting in my office, a beautiful space in Manhattan overlooking the city, and I'm thinking about something my mother said to me in that coffee shop all those years ago. "You don't understand." She was right. I didn't understand. Not back then. I was too angry, too hurt, too determined to prove that I didn't need them. But now, having lived a full decade of my own successful, independent life, I understand. I understand that my parents' rejection wasn't really about me. It was about them. It was about their fear. It was about their inability to imagine a world where success didn't look exactly like their definition of success. It was about their belief that emotion was weakness, that art wasn't real work, that anything that didn't generate profit was a waste of time. They were afraid that if I pursued my own path, I would fail. And if I failed, it would reflect badly on them. It would suggest that the Whitmore name, the Montgomery name, the Harrington legacy, it wasn't enough to guarantee success. That terrified them. So they pushed me to be what they wanted. And when I refused, they abandoned me. Not because they stopped loving me. I think, in their broken way, they always loved me, but because they couldn't bear to watch me become something they didn't understand. The tragedy is that by abandoning me, they lost the one person who could have helped them evolve. They lost the one voice that was asking them to be more than just ruthless business people. They lost the opportunity to become better than they were. Instead, they doubled down on what they knew. They isolated themselves further. They became more rigid, more controlling, more afraid. And in doing so, they destroyed the very thing they thought they were protecting. My parents thought they didn't need me. They were wrong. But I need to be clear about something. This isn't a story about redemption. This isn't a story about how I eventually forgave them and we had some beautiful deathbed scene. This is a story about loss. It's a story about what happens when people prioritize ego over love, profit over people, control over connection. My parents lost their empire, yes. But more importantly, they lost their son. And that loss was never repaired. I built my own life, completely independent of them. I became successful without their help, without their approval, without their name. I built a career as a filmmaker, a storyteller, a creator. I became someone I was actually proud to be. And I did it all alone. That's the real victory. Not that I proved them wrong, though I did. But that I survived their rejection and came out the other side as a whole person. That I built something meaningful from nothing. That I learned to love myself when nobody else did. If I could go back and talk to that 18-year-old boy, the one who was sitting in that cold dining room being told to choose between his dreams and his family, I would tell him something. It's going to hurt. It's going to be harder than you can possibly imagine. You're going to sleep in a tiny apartment with holes in the walls. You're going to work 3 jobs and still worry about paying rent. You're going to stand on stage and pour your heart out to audiences of 10 people. You're going to question every decision. You're going to wonder if you made a mistake. But here's what I know that you don't yet. You're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to become someone you love. You're going to build a life that matters. You're going to create art that changes people's lives. You're going to be free. And your family is going to spend the rest of their lives watching you from a distance, wishing they had believed in you. Wishing they had supported you. Wishing they had been brave enough to let you be yourself. So take the pain now. Take the rejection now. Take the loneliness now. Because on the other side of all of it, you're going to find something your family never had: peace. To anyone watching this who has been rejected by their family, who has been told that their dreams are worthless, who has been abandoned for not fitting into someone else's vision, I want you to know something. That rejection is not a reflection of your worth. That abandonment is not a judgment on your potential. That loneliness is temporary. What's permanent is what you build after they leave. What's permanent is who you become when nobody is watching, when nobody is controlling you, when nobody is telling you that you're not enough. Your family might not need you, but you don't need them either. And that freedom, that's worth everything. My name is James Whitmore, and this is my story. My rich family thought they didn't need me. They told me I was useless. They rejected me because I didn't fit into their vision. They threw me away. And then they lost it all. Not because I caused it, but because I was the invisible foundation that held everything together. I was the voice of humanity in a house made of money and control. I was the only thing that could have saved them from themselves. But I couldn't save them. Because they didn't want to be saved. They wanted to be right. And that choice cost them everything. Meanwhile, I built a life that was entirely my own. I became successful not despite being rejected by my family, but because of it. I became free because they abandoned me. I became whole because I had to become whole for myself. That's the lesson. That's the truth that took me 10 years to fully understand. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is rejection, because it forces you to find yourself. It forces you to build your own foundation. It forces you to become the person you were always meant to be. My family thought they didn't need me. They were wrong. But I'm glad they thought that, because it set me free. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by your family, if you've ever been rejected for being yourself, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming. Stories about family, about redemption, about becoming yourself despite everyone telling you that you can't. Thank you for listening to my truth. I hope it inspired you to live yours.